Over the course of Ninjago's lifespan, the ninja have used a lot of different weapons, some of them normal, some of them elemental, some of them created the land that they walk on. I am of course referring to the golden weapons, and over the course of the show, they have always popped their head up in some way, shape or form, and that is for good reason. They are the weapons when you think of Ninjago. But because of that, they've gone through a lot of different design variants, both in the show and as actual LEGO pieces themselves, and this episode we're gonna be talking about that. So let's actually start with the show themselves. Of course, they first appeared in the pilot episodes, and a lot of people don't really talk about this, but they did actually look a little bit different in these episodes. This is mainly down to the fact that in the pilots themselves, they were a much brighter and more metallic looking gold, and they also had more of a glow to them, and honestly, this is possibly my favourite design of the golden weapons. They just had this really nice presence about them, they really stood out, and it's something that I really did like to see. And also, sometimes, if the animators remembered to do so, the little dot in every single of the dragon's eyes would change colour depending on whether or not the user was actually using the weapons, and it was just a very fun little design detail. But there's not much else to really say about them apart from that, because then we move on to Season 1, and the weapons do become a lot more of a less metallic, deeper gold in comparison to the pilots. Now, I will say I don't think this is a bad thing at all, because again, they do just look absolutely fantastic. But like I said, they are just a much deeper looking gold, and they are less of a glowy finish in comparison. But that's probably because they didn't want the weapons to stand out too much. But they're still amazing looking, and they maintain all those little details that we love. And these, of course, were used until the end of Season 1 or the beginning of Season 2, until the mega weapon itself was actually formed, which by all accounts is technically still the golden weapons. So instead of being 4 individual weapons of creation, it was one large weapon that was used to Garmadon's advantage. But this didn't really last long, did it? Because obviously the ninja used the golden weapons against the golden weapons, and they were officially sent off into space as a comet and landed on what was then known as Delta V, and they were eventually retrieved to forge the golden armor. And the golden armor is a completely different thing when it comes to the weapons. They have nowhere near the properties of the weapons, so I'm not going to consider it, and I'm not going to talk about the state and the condition of the armor itself. But obviously it will come to head in a moment. But in terms of present time, that was it for the weapons for a while. We did see them in 2 flashbacks. We saw them once in Possession, where it was a weird animation era idea. The nunchucks weren't lit up, there was only one shuriken, and the sword was just a sword. So, I mean, that was them. That's technically a design variant of them, but clearly not correct. And then also the other reference was then in Season 8, where we do see the weapons again, and they're a bit more accurate considering it was a 2D painting, but it was the original weapons there as well. But we're going to mainly then talk about in Season 10 itself, where the ninja do take those golden weapons and they do reforge them to fight against the Oni, and this was the first instance of a major design change. This is obviously because of the new designs that they wanted to go for the sets, but of course you could make the argument that Kai obviously forged them differently to how they originally were. But the Sword of Fire remained the same. The shurikens I think were a little bit different, but not too much. The main difference of course came from the nunchucks and the scythe, because the scythe was notably smaller. The head of it was the same, but it was smaller with a dragon head on the bottom, and the nunchucks had the dragon heads on the bottom instead of the top. So those were the design changes for those weapons, and honestly they're really cool, just not the original ones in my opinion. But they were officially depowered after the fight with the Oni, and they were then laid to rest by all accounts by Wu himself, where he placed it in the ninja's cave, or their little headquarters underneath the monastery, only for them to be brought back and crystallized. And a lot of people may not notice this, but again, there were some subtle differences in the weapons, because obviously it was a different animation team. You can see that the scythe was a little smaller and a little thinner, and that's the same with the swords. The nunchucks looked relatively the same. I think it was just a little more pointy in comparison on the dragon heads, and the shurikens were noticeably thicker. But again, this is just down to the fact it's a different animation team, but those differences are there. And then of course the weapons were corrupted, so those weapons went from the nice golden powers of creation to the corrupted powers of destruction, and it was a cool thing to look at, only really in the show. But after the ninja did retrieve the weapons back at the end of the season and purified them, they of course went back to their original condition. But like I said, in the scene in particular that I'm showing on screen, you can see where the weapons, particularly the sword, looks notably smaller, as well the scythe may I add, and you can see where there are those subtle differences. But like I said, purely down to the fact it's an animation studio. But then by all accounts, the only other time we've seen them, in Dragon's Rising anyway, was in the episode 11 of season 1, where the weapons are shown in reference to the first Binjitsu master, and they are identical to their crystallized appearances, because of course they wouldn't make new models for them, so they do resemble those small size differences that I said about. But that's the journey of the weapons in the show in a more simplified way. But then let's actually talk about the weapons in terms of their minifigure or Lego variants, because these are the ones that I think a lot of people think of when they do think of the golden weapons as well, and they've had 3 major variants. The originals of course being very simple versions apart from the uniquely trimmed Sword of Fire, and honestly I feel very biased saying this, but I do love these weapons. Even though the shurikens aside than the nunchucks are very simplified, I do think they are fantastic to see, and I do think they do a lot. But like I said, this is where the unique printing for the Sword of Fire was created, and to this day I think it's one of the best Lego pieces we've ever gotten. But these were the golden weapons for the sets that they were released in, and it wasn't until Legacy where we did get new variants. Obviously then Legacy came along, we had the exact same Sword of Fire, which makes sense, and because of course it looks fantastic. The shurikens gained new grip pieces, which did look fantastic, but then of course we did see the difference in the scythe and the nunchucks. The nunchucks mainly acquired those new dragon hilts that we got in Legacy, or more specifically hunted, but again they are just a fantastic looking piece, and individually it's probably the best nunchucks of lightning, but overall I still prefer the originals. And then the scythe is purely brick built, and again utilizes the dragon piece, but a lot of other nice pieces in general. So it is a nice one to have, but I think ultimately in terms of actual display, I do still prefer the original. And then Crystallized came and knocked it all out, and gave us these very weird looking weapons. It just ruined every single one of them in my opinion. The one it ruined the least was probably the shurikens, because they look fine, but still they're just not as good as what we did get in every other wave. So yeah, these are probably some of my least favorite things to come out in Ninjago, but those are the weapons that we got in Crystallized. But that's the thing, these designs in both the show and the set did just receive a lot of love, and received so many design variants. But where does it stand in terms of how they compare against each other? Because where some of them are so different, of course it is difficult to say. But this is the official ranking. In terms of the show, from the worst to the best, and let me know if you agree with this or not, the worst is definitely the Crystallized or the Dragon's Rising variants, because like I said, the sizings are just completely off. It's very strange. The second one or third place is probably the reforged weapons from Legacy or March of the Oni, because while the sword and the shurikens are the same, the scythe and the nunchucks are just not as good in the show itself, and also does also somewhat translate to the Lego bricks, but they're still nice regardless, so it feels almost bad saying it like that. But then the second best is the season 1 season 2 variant, because the deeper gold is nice and they do look pretty cool, but in my opinion nothing pales in comparison to those original ones. The glow, the light metallic look, just the overall presence of that about them were just fantastic looking, and in my opinion there's just no counter in that. But as for the ranking of the actual Lego ones themselves, I think it goes without saying that Crystallized is the worst. It just is the worst variant of every single one. I think the shurikens are passable, and I know a lot of people do like them, but they just look weird next to the other weapons as well, so they just don't fit in. And then the Legacy ones are the second up, because while the sword is the same, the shuriken's nice, and I really do like the nunchuck, the scythe kind of just puts it down. It's very difficult to display and have with a minifigure. And again, I just feel like such a nostalgia guy, but the original ones are just the best. I don't know what else to say, but please let me know if you agree with this or not. But that, by all accounts, was a bit of a history and a ranking of Ninjago's most iconic weapon. And let me know what you think, and if you want more videos where I discuss these smaller aspects of Ninjago like this, because I do think it's interesting to cover a specific part of the show's history. And other than that, like I said, just let me know if you agree with what I said or not. But other than that, guys, thank you for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. Take care, okay, bye!